Welcome to Slash Forward. In this episode, we're going to learn to craft dolls of ourselves using only dirt, fingernails, and jism as we roll through the 2020 Hoodoo-centered thriller, Spell. If you're looking to reach master levels of hexing, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss an episode. Let's get to it. We open on a man remembering his rough childhood spent getting whipped by his father. Despite this, Marcus has grown into a tremendously successful man in terms of finances, not necessarily in terms of his personal life, as he laughs and chides his wife who got herself stuck behind a simple door. He does eventually pick it for her to reestablish their spousal trust. At work, we learn he's a ruthless and unrelenting attorney, engaged in leading a delicate strategic initiative for a huge class action lawsuit. His day of crushing it is interrupted, however, when he gets a call from an attorney working out of his hometown. Strong indication of bad news incoming. And as it turns out, his father has passed away. Well, bye! Over dinner, we learn that they've been estranged for a very long time. So much so that his children, Ty and Sam, haven't even met him. Regardless, Viora determines that a patriarch deserves reverence, especially in death and regardless of how they live their life. So they'll all be attending the memorial service. Soon they're enjoying the fresh mountain breezes of Appalachia, up in their little single-engine plane piloted by Mark, because he is a talented dude. They make one stop along the way, touching down on a single runway airport out in the boonies. The kids fuel up while Mark heads in for a Diet Coke and some Eye of Newt. As Ty tries to get some bars on his phone, he enlists the help of a passing fisherman, who convinces him to let him see the phone in order to best provide assistance. In the course of their conversation, Ty whips out his withered hand to point out that they're heading up yonder, which spooks out his new friend and causes him to continue on toward his fishing hole. Inside, Marcus settles up on the fuel. The proprietor's busy crafting some talisman of protection and good fortune, which he recommends to Marcus, but the offer is declined. And then they're just about to take off when the town sheriff rolls up to slam his huge Johnson on the table and make sure they all know who's in charge around here. But all their papers are in order and he's just scoping things out. So soon they're back on their way into creepier and stormier territory. The adults have a tempestuous argument about the best way to rear children, contrasting the tension between giving them a better life and outright spoiling them, and their emotions are matched by the surrounding Addie.
I've flown in this before, just everything's cool.
Nope. We then take a brief journey back with Mark, remembering a childhood pig slaughtering that startles him awake in someone's attic with some minor to moderate injuries to his foot. He hobbles to a window and peers out, only to find that he's off in a holler somewhere. Eloise then busts in to provide comfort and first aid, insisting he lay back in his bed before talking or providing any information whatsoever. But he sours their relationship immediately by taking the Lord's name in vain. So she calls up Earl and Lewis to help get his big ass back in bed. After a few more blasphemes, he remembers suddenly that he had an accident, and old Earl tells him that he was the only one they found in the plane. An intense desire to begin searching for his kin gets him all riled up again, so they get to putting that hoodoo dust in his face to calm him back down a bit. Then Eloise goes out to get some prime dirt from the yard and some laundry from the line, all vital pieces of this special recipe she's cooking up. By the end, she has a unique little doll, which Earl finishes off with a loogie as Lewis digs up some fresh graves. When Mark wakes up again, he's feeling a bit calmer and pleads with her for an ambulance and a search party to find his family. But in his attempt to convince her, he accidentally distracts her as she goes off on the unimportance of legal tender, the offer of which is only secondary to his request for his family. She also tells him she doesn't have a phone anyway, and quickly whips out the special boogedy she made of him. It's a magical doll that's made with parts of him, such as blood and hair.
A pinch of semen.
Oh yeah? If good things happen to the doll, they will happen to him, helping him heal. So she sets his new friend up at the window to keep the devil out and goes about her business. Marcus decides to test whether his foot can bear weight. He finds the door is locked, but does discover an unlocked window. Despite the unsure footing, he climbs out and goes gallivanting across the rooftops. He makes it a good way, eventually arriving at the beacon where he pauses to observe the events below. Some of the townsfolk have come for magic healing, and while they're using animal parts tonight, they're promised something more pure and powerful coming up real soon. The elderly parishioners are granted healing of speech and sight, causing us to pause and wonder why Eloise waited so long to cure them of their ailments. But we're distracted from this when Julius uses his fresh pair of goat eyes to look up, and what he sees is Marcus. So they put the party on ice and grab Lewis as they rush back to the room. Marcus now finds himself in a race to get there first so he can play like he's sleeping, even though he is fully saturated with water. He does make it, and while Eloise has her suspicions, she's not ready to outright accuse him of lying, because that's no small thing. After another daddy dream, Marcus wakes up to find some nourishment, and his complimentary assessment of the victuals seems to put him back in favorable graces. As Eloise joyfully heads downstairs to serve him up a second helping of stew, he takes the chance to remove the ding-a-ling out of his doorbell. When she returns, he casually asks her about the cell phone alerts he's been hearing, but she brushes this off with righteous indignation. Again, not wanting to impose the discourtesy of suggesting that someone else is lying, he chooses to let it go. Then Eloise casts the bones and predicts he'll see his family again around the time of the blood moon. Afterward, she tries to convince him to get back to his roots and embrace his true self. But when she leaves, he realigns the bones and notices their configuration resembles his son's unique injury. Now shook, Marcus grabs his ding-a-ling to pick the lock and make his way down, moving slowly and carefully so as to avoid detection. Their pet crow nearly gives him away, but then he hugs up to that wall like he's making love, and eventually gets deep into the woods. He uses his skills to navigate via the stars and finds his way to the bottom of a gully. While there, he pauses to reminisce, which gives him the strength to continue. He eventually comes upon the wreckage of his plane and finds it empty save for some significant blood spatter. And then right when he may have found a road or friendly residence, Lewis gets him. He wakes up the next day to observe the elders taking the carriage into town, excitedly preparing for the evening's blood moon festivities. Bored, he decides to check on his wound and finds that most of the pain is radiating from a spike that's been inserted into his heel. So he works to extricate it from his body and gets quite a bit of fluid running out. But afterward, it seems to generally feel a bit better. After this, he picks the lock again and heads right back out, stumbling upon the fresh graves in the backyard. But when he claws them up, it's just some animals of various sorts. Of course, they did waste quite a bit of time digging such a large grave for a chicken. Then he ventures into the barn and finds a cellar. While he does find a variety of corpses down there, as well as some magical dolls, his family is not present. He comes across a picture that implies the magic provides the family with extended life. Then he finds a spell book confirming that he's been getting himself spelled up this whole time. Thinking fast, he grabs a variety of magical items and puts together at least one boogedy of his own, which he stashes away under the front porch. Inside the house, he hears another cell phone alert and goes to find it. While he does locate the stash, he has to hurry off when they return from their day trip. Understanding the importance now to continue the ruse in the hopes of getting some info on his family, he decides to go ahead and reinsert the foot spike. And slowly, feeling its rough edges grip and pull at his flesh the whole way in. It's lucky he did this because under suspicion that he's been up walking around, they take a peek at his swollen foot. As soon as they leave again, he makes an emergency call. The sheriff relates that his daughter and wife came into the station a few days ago and he's been out looking for him. He provides the names of his captors who are familiar to the sheriff, and he promises to head that way. Now wanting to make sure he's ready for company, Marcus undoes his foot spike. Make up your mind. This provides no advantage at this point, however, because upon the arrival of his rescuer, Eloise storms in and puts the hoodoo on him, preventing him from using that spike, removing his tongue, and then spiritually binding him. But he's very determined, so he rolls over and easily walks to the window, but he can't shout. And instead of making some other noise while the opportunity is present, he works to reconstruct the doll and then shuffles off. This was the best option, we learn, as he bursts out of the woods at just the right moment to catch the passing sheriff after sundown. What? I mean, how? Safe in the car, he completes the necessary steps to regain power of speech and movement, and explains what's happened. The sheriff calms him, letting him know it'll all be over soon as he returns him to his captors. Twist? In the barn, they march in his family, who are all entranced by the hoodoo. Then they lay him down on the table to start the magic on him, but he pulls the old switcheroo on Earl and flashes back to show that he did similar switcheroos to some of their supplies and potions. So he got the awake powder instead of the sleep powder. The whole town then runs off scared, for plot convenience. He then administers the awake powder to his family, and we're happy to see them all alive and intact. Well, mostly intact. He then runs the plan with his family before heading out to bushwhack the sheriff, giving strong indications that he is a master of Krav Maga. He has just enough time to pick up his doll as the villagers arrive back with torches and pitchforks. Lewis goes in first and gets to choking him something fierce, but soon finds his lungs are full of water, a side effect of his boogedy getting stashed in a water bucket. Eloise senses this somehow, but it's too late. Then they have a final wizarding showdown where Marcus hits her with the dust before hammering her boogedy through a pillar. Now accepting of who he is as a person, he offers no comfort, instead locking her in the barn to burn alive. He then holds off the townsfolk by showing that he has boogedies of them all, even those of them he never previously met. So they let him walk away slowly while the unspent fuel cells that were stored in the barn explode behind him. The family, now reunited, then drives off into the night, hoping that if they hurry, they might still make it to the funeral service. I have a website set up where you can support the channel through donations or merch. I'd like to take a moment to give a huge thanks to my donors memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. Spell was an unfortunately mediocre movie. Not to say it was bad, it was certainly no worse than other recent releases like Death of Me, but its world was not thoroughly thought through and the plot was rushed, which seemed to eliminate a lot of the suspense. It definitely needed a few more passes on the script. I say the mediocrity was unfortunate because of the promise it showed in its first few minutes. The way the characters were introduced in the beginning was clear and concise and demonstrated who they were by showing us rather than telling us. It's a simple thing, but was done very well. I'm not sure what happened to this throughout the rest of the movie, but it was not utilized effectively throughout. If you enjoyed the video, I'd love for you to become part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.